Nathalie is a coming-of-age story about two teenagers, Nathalie Bellevaux and Ange Amirault. It's primarily their love story, and it's a true story. But it's also a story about the strength and tenacity of the Acadian people who were separated from each other during the brutal deportation of thousands of Acadians from their Nova Scotia homes. The story begins in 1755 when the British and French were fighting for dominance as they colonized the Americas. At this time, Governor Charles Lawrence issued an edict to expel the Acadian peoples, which is known in this area of Nova Scotia as Le Grand Dérangement. The piece I'm reading today takes place following this deportation when the protagonist, Nathalie, finds herself separated from her family and friends, and the ship she is on has docked in North Carolina. From the boat's ramp, Nathalie saw the tall blonde man on the wharf staring at her. The corner of his mouth raised slightly, not quite a smile, and she involuntarily smiled back. "Bring over the girl with the dark red skirt," Hamilton commanded Hutchinson, pointing in Nathalie's direction. The captain grabbed Nathalie's arm. She quickly reached behind her and took hold of Ludvin's hand, pulling the youngster along with her. Standing in front of Hamilton and not knowing what else to do, Nathalie curtsied. "What's your name?" he asked in French, determined to know for certain that she spoke the language. "I'm Mademoiselle Nathalie Bellevaux, and this is my sister Ludvin." Hamilton continued to ask Nathalie questions in French, where she was from, her age, were her parents on board the ship. Nathalie answered him honestly, explaining she was born in Grand Pre, journeyed to Cap-Sable when she missed the boat transporting her mama and sisters, was living with the Amirault family when the British turned them out of their homes. She was 14 years old and separated from her betrothed. There was something familiar in Nathalie's intonation. It reminded him of southern France in his own beloved's inflection. Hamilton regarded Nathalie more closely, looking her up and down, considering the health of the girl beneath the grimy clothes and dirty skin. "Do you know what indentured servitude is, Nathalie?" Hamilton addressed her with the familiarity that a father would a child. Nathalie shook her head. "It means that in return for taking care of you, feeding you, and housing you, for a period of 3 years, you must do my bidding." He paused, then continued emphatically, "You essentially belong to me until your time is served." Nathalie stared back at Hamilton. She started to open her mouth, to assert that she belonged to no one, but she stopped short. Nathalie had overheard a conversation on the boat about Acadians being held in another warehouse in Boston. Her ears perked up when she heard the names of Baron d'Entremont and Jacques Amirault, some sort of petition being worked on so their families would not go to the Carolinas. She knew in her heart that Ange would remain faithful to her, but she also needed to survive if they were eventually be together again. Nathalie remained silent, bobbing her head and lowering her gaze. "She'll do," Hamilton said to Hutchinson. "Am I correct in assuming she has no possessions on board?" The captain shook his head. "No, nothing." Hamilton called out to the black man standing nearby, "Get her into the wagon, Tommy." Nathalie suddenly realized that Ludvin was going to be left behind. Her mind whirled with the fear of losing her. "Please, sir," she yelled to Hamilton as he walked over to his horse. "I can't leave my sister. Please, sir, can you take both of us?" Hamilton stopped and turned around. He considered her outspoken temperament, her impertinence at raising her voice and addressing him in such a manner when his back was turned. He snickered as he thought about his wife. Yes, Juliet was going to enjoy sparring with this one. He scowled at her. "If I take your sister, it'll cost you both, Nathalie. A term of 5 years of service, not 3. Nathalie was shaking. In 5 years, she would be 19 years old. "I accept your terms, monsieur," then whispered under her breath, 5 years. The Acadians were farmers and fishers who settled in Nova Scotia as far back as the early 1600s. They were also known for their ingenious dike building that allowed them to reclaim acres of fertile soil from the marshland. I'm 11th generation Bellevaux and 9th generation Amirault, born in Canada. When I was doing research on my lineage at the Pubnico archives, I came across a historical text about the lives of Nathalie and Ange, who are my 4th great-grandparents. Their love story parallels the famous epic poem Evangeline, that was written in 1874 by Longfellow. In the poem, the star-crossed lovers, Evangeline and Gabriel, are fictional characters, and Gabriel dies in Evangeline's arms before they can wed. But as I've mentioned, Nathalie and Ange were real people who lived through the expulsion of the Acadians and did marry, and that's why I'm here today. With this twist in mind, I thought it would be interesting to write a historical fiction story focusing on these families in exile in Massachusetts for 10 years between 1755 and 1766. During the early 1700s, Britain insisted that the Acadians take an oath of allegiance to the English crown. However, the Acadians, being Catholic, wanted to remain neutral because the oath implied giving up practicing their faith. The Acadians were also friendly with the Mi'kmaq, who were also being persecuted by the British. English authorities feared that the Acadians and the Mi'kmaq would also join up together and rise up against the crown. So the British confiscated the Acadian lands and possessions and forcibly removed upwards to 13,000 people. Thousands of Acadians died of disease or starvation on the ships that sailed to parts of the United States, France, and the Caribbean. And many more Acadians suffered from isolation as refugees in unfamiliar lands or succumbed to disease. This is why the deportation today is recognized as a crime against humanity. I grew up in Ontario, not Nova Scotia, and during our summer holidays, we always went down home to Pubnico and Yarmouth. And it was from my grandparents that I first learned about the Acadian expulsion. And I think as a kid myself, learning about the violence that happened on Canadian soil really struck a chord with me. Yet many Canadians know nothing about this event unless you mention Cajun, and then they think they know. So I knew I wanted to write this story for a younger adult audience because learning about our Canadian history beyond the fur trade and Confederation is important to building empathy for people suffering from displacement and as refugees from violence. So while the story does include facts and dates about this turbulent time, the story of Nathalie and Ange and their survival can make the younger reader not only invested in their outcomes, but also in how we react to refugees today. When I think about stories, what Rob's saying here, what comes to mind is the novel Fahrenheit 451, where, the idea that you have to burn the history because it's dangerous and stories shouldn't be allowed to live. And I think that if we're really to understand ourselves as humans and how we function in society, I think that's where our stories become really important. And it's interesting that all 6 of us authors have sort of written stories from a personal perspective. We have some sort of personal connection to the time or the event that's going on. And so if you can build a story with fiction and embed all of this this real information, I think that helps us understand ourselves more as humans. So certainly it gives that a better perspective on who we are. It's challenging sometimes when you're writing a historical fiction story to watch how my story is the Acadians, and of course the British are the bad guys, but not every British person is bad. So you really have to temper how you look at what's going on in the situation and the cultures that are behind the peoples that are doing it. I would imagine the same thing with German stories about World War II. So it's challenging to sort of have that balance between telling the story accurately without making it lopsided. and sort of just coming across as you're, as the author coming across as being just bitter or something. So I think that, you're working in your understanding of human rights, but and the discrimination that might be going on, but you do want to make sure that you're giving a balanced account in a way.